This video contains significant plot spoilers for Isles of the Emberdark, the Stormlight Archive through Wind and Truth, Tress of the Emerald Sea, the novella Dawn Shard, and all of Mistborn Era 2. I will also be discussing the following books, but in my opinion, in a way that if you have not read them, would not spoil them. And those include The Sunlit Man, Yumi and the Nightmare Painter, Mistborn Era 1, and Shadows for Silence in the Forests of Hell. Hey nerds, what's up? It's time to go through every Cosmere mention in the newest secret project, Isles of the Emberdark by Brandon Sanderson. If you're new here, I do these Cosmere connections for every one of his books, so you can check those out on my Sanderson playlist. But today we're gonna jump right into it and get to all of the Cosmere connections in this novel. We're gonna start with a quick overview of the timeline, and then we're gonna go through places, people, shards, and investiture. Those are my 4 categories for today. And when we finish with that, I will be doing a brief review and rating and what I thought of the book overall, separate from Cosmere Connections, at the end of this video. So you can use the timestamps and the chapters below to skip around if there's something you're particularly interested in. So the reason I always like to start with timeline on these things is it just gives us a little bit of perspective. And in this one, it's particularly important because Isles of the Emberdark is the latest published thing we have in the Cosmere timeline. So this book is happening at the end of anything else you've read that's published. And I like to check that list from time to time. I'll put it up on the screen. They have it over at the 17th Shards Coppermind, but it's great to look at this to get a sense of where everybody is. And so that means all the stuff we learn here is much further along, and particularly since, you know, the 5th Stormlight Archive book just came out, it's a good reminder that this is far and away in the future from that. So let's start with places. And in our first category of places, we're gonna just talk about the casual mentions of a lot of planets that are just thrown around in pretty much every book now. So let's start with Scadrial. If you are unfamiliar with the term Scadrial, that is the planet that the Mistborn books take place on. In particular, in this novel, we are talking about the Malwish, which are the southern Scadrians that we specifically meet in Mistborn Era 2. We also, with the Malwish in this book, see a new mask type, I guess is what I'll say. We're used to the ones Leonor wears, which are kind of the wooden black and red masks. And now we are seeing, it looks like maybe masks embedded in their skin or metal, very different than what we've seen before, which I think is always an interesting cultural shift. We also get a quick mention that at this time, or recently, the Malwish Prime Minister Yadowek was assassinated. Now, we have not met him. Again, this is far in the future for Mistborn Era 2, so we don't know who that is. It's also important to note that in pretty much every other secret project or book that makes mention to future things, we have learned that the Scadrians are pretty much the most technologically advanced planet in the Cosmere. They really led the technological advances, and B, that there may be a not so good force in the Cosmere. I'd say we see shades of that with the Ghost Bloods, particularly as we see them on Roshar in the Stormlight Archive, and hints of them in Mistborn Era 2. And we also see this a little bit in like the Sunlit Man and other small mentions throughout the secret projects. That said, in this novel, I feel like is the most direct we've ever gotten that like, hey, people don't like the Scadrians. We have Starling directly calling them fascists, and we also have just the whole thing of them trying to put pressure and basically take over the First of the Sun for their own benefit. So I think it's like we've established firmly where they stand. We also get a Roshar mention in this book. Roshar is the planet that the Stormlight Archive take place on, and we particularly get this piece of information that the Dromedad system is important because it is situated between Scadrial and Roshar, which are the 2 major players in the war. And I think we kind of knew that Roshar, well, we definitely knew Scadrial was going to be a major player in this. And I think we always assumed Roshar, but here's it directly stated, like those are the 2 sides in the war. And particularly where we end Stormlight Archive 5, I think that has super interesting implications for us to theorize about. We also get a couple brief mentions of the planet Taldain. This is the one that many of you may not know because Taldain is the planet that White Sand takes place on. Now, White Sand for a long time in the fandom was just something you found out about by joining their mailing list, and they would for free send you Sanderson's unedited and unpublished prose novel about White Sand. It was later adapted into a graphic novel, 3-volume graphic novel version, but I think Sanderson still plans to publish a prose version, mostly because I think the graphic novels weren't necessarily super successful. I don't think people loved the way they worked out, but that's, whatever. Anyway, that's Taldain with White Sand. We also get a mention of Dhatri, which is the home planet to the Aether. Now, we've really only seen Aether and Tress of the Emerald Sea on Lumar, which is not where Aether originates. So we actually haven't ever seen Dhatri in any novel yet. I do think it's interesting that in this novel we learn that there is no perpendicularity there, or rather not anymore. So what happened to the perpendicularity? Does that mean the shard died? We're gonna talk about perpendicularities a little bit later, but I always think that's an important piece of information to remember. So that's the end of those kind of smaller place mentions. And I do think there's a nice little quote between Starling and Dodger that sums it all up. Scadrial is the most technologically advanced planet in the Cosmere. Did you clear that claim with Taldain? She thought. Or better, the planet's invention created, and for all your technological prowess, your ships still run on Aether. Our next place we're going to talk about is Shadesmar, and we learned a ton about Shadesmar in this novel. In this case, it was called the Emberdark or the Unsea. Now, previously, most of our information about Shadesmar came through the Stormlight Archive and kind of the Rosharian perspective, even though we did get shades of it in Mistborn, A Secret History. So in the Cosmere, there are 3 realms. There is the physical realm, where all of our stories are taking place. There is the cognitive realm, which is Shadesmar, and that is kind of the realm of thought. It's called cognitive realm. And then we have the spiritual realm, which we previously didn't know much about, but if you want to know a lot more about the spiritual realm, you definitely want to read Wind and Truth, which is the 5th book in the Stormlight Archive. One thing I loved about this book was the descriptions that we get of how Shadesmar manifests under different planets. I think it really emphasized the cognitive realm aspect of it, that the things in this realm are shaped by people's thoughts. And we've seen it so much in Roshar. I started really kind of thinking that all of Shadesmar were these glass beads, but of course in this book we get other descriptions, like on Nalthis, under Nalthis it's painted colors, wet with pigment and flowers that drip ink. On Roshar, it's the glass beads, of course, as we've seen. And in Dromedad, it's an ocean planet, so it's the Unsea. It is like water. I also really loved the detail that as individuals on the planets become more Cosmere aware, that the distance between the planets grows in Shadesmar because it is influenced by that cognition. And the great quote that said, "Good thing humans are really, really bad at imagining the actual distances between planets, or soon it wouldn't be any faster to travel in here than in the physical realm." Of course, that also as a good reminder that as we get into the space travel of the Cosmere, places that you can travel through in Shadesmar are going to be cheaper to get to because they are much closer together versus using faster than light travel outside of Shadesmar. People without perpendicularities are going to be much harder to get to. So keeping in mind the planets that have perpendicularities and the planets that don't is really going to change their involvement in the war and the economy because of that travel. We also hear about the Knell in this book, and I think the only other time we've ever gotten a mention of that was in Wind and Truth. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that was created when Ambition was destroyed, and we'll talk a little bit more about Ambition later. Okay, JK guys, I fact-checked myself while I was editing to be sure of this one because then I doubted myself, and we don't actually know if Ambition is the reason for the Knell. It could be any of the other destroyed shards that we know of. We also get to see Silverlight in this novel, which is a city that's completely located in Shadesmar, and we find out a new piece of information, which is called the Silverlight Nexus Perpendicularity, which is a perpendicularity that is a single one that leads to 3 places physically, which I don't think we know where they go other than one place is Yolen. I don't know how that works. Do you have to be thinking about where you want to go? But that was really an interesting piece of info we learned. I think it might also be news to us that Silverlight contains time dilation. I think this is going to become particularly important as we continue in the Cosmere because time dilation is going to mess with the people who can be alive still in late stage Cosmere. And we also know after Wind and Truth, we will be experiencing time dilation on Roshar. So we have a lot of places experiencing time dilation, and it's important to remember because because again, I think that's just going to be used to keep characters around longer than otherwise they'd be able to. Next up is Yolen, which I just mentioned for the perpendicularity, but Yolen used to be kind of a hidden place, but I feel like we're hearing a lot more about it now. As a refresher, Yolen is the planet where the original shattering of Adonalsium happened, and it is where all of the vessels of the original Shards originated. If you need a reminder about Shards, I do have a whole video just on a Shards primer, if that's a little hazy for you. But it's also where major players like Frost and Xysis and Hoid are originally from. It's where the dragons are from, Shodel. Lots of the bigger, older players come from Yolen, and obviously Starling is from there as well. We also talk a lot about perpendicularities in this novel, particularly that Patchy's eye is the perpendicularity on First of the Sun, which is a little weird because usually a shard needs to be on a planet for a perpendicularity to be there. In this case, Patchy's eye Patchy is an avatar of autonomy, and we'll talk a little bit more about autonomy in our shards section, but autonomy doesn't seem their perpendicularities work in the same way as other perpendicularities where they can leave their avatars and still have a stable one there. As a reminder for perpendicularities, they're just a transfer point between the physical realm and the cognitive realm, and we see them a lot, particularly in the Stormlight Archive and also Mistborn Era 1. But they're pretty much present in like every Cosmere novel when you know where to look for them. And then finally, we have a couple new worlds mentioned. The first one being the Grand Apparatus, which is so fascinating, and Sanderson has mentioned a few times that he wants to set a story on the Grand Apparatus, so I'm sure we will learn more about that in the future, but it's not something we know a lot about right now. And then we get the name Zidorna dropped from the Aureali who were traveling through Shadesmar, and we don't know anything about that location, but it's a new name, so I'm gonna include it here. So let's move into people. Let's talk about our world hoppers, or our not world hoppers, just the people here that have interesting histories. And let's start with Hoid. Why not? Our beloved Hoid. Now, if you're newer in the fandom, Hoid used to be a very fun Easter egg for everybody to find because he appears in every single book. But these days, he's just really present and like a main character, so it's not hard to know where he is. Hoid is a mentor to a few of our characters. He's an official mentor to Sigil, who is somebody that we first met in the Stormlight Archive, and an official mentor clearly to Starling in this book, and I would like to say an unofficial mentor to Kaladin in the Stormlight Archive. So obviously the Stormlight Archive is where we've seen him a lot. Importantly, we find out he's married. Excuse me. Which books has he been married in? There's a few late stage Cosmere things that we've read, and we've never known this information. So is it new? Is it not? What he says about that is, she and I aren't on speaking terms, he said softly, partially because she doesn't remember ever having been my wife. Actually, does he marry Jasna? This is literally occurring to me in this moment. No. Anyway. Sorry, I just like I literally had that thought in this moment. And anyway, we can comment about that below. Other things, he mentioned, he's currently trapped in a vault. I'm still on the Jasna thing. He's currently trapped in a vault. We don't know where that vault is, what he's doing there, but it's not that much of a surprise when you think of like how he spent the entirety of Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I think this is a common occurrence to Hoid, so I'm not like that worried that this is going to have some major implications somewhere. And then he also mentions the twins, which I don't think we know who those are. I think it's probably an Easter egg to characters we're going to meet in the future. Next up, let's talk about dragons. So Starling was pretty exciting when the preview chapters came out for this secret project because the fandom has known for a while that there are dragons in the Cosmere, and we're always kind of like, dragon spot. And now here we go, we have a main character dragon. So we've always known that dragons can have a human form and a dragon form because of other dragons we've seen in the Cosmere. And there's a few things we learned though. I don't think we knew that the dragons were forced to remain human for a certain period of time. I think that's new information for us. We also learn a little bit more information about why they're so hardy, because they can directly draw energy from the spiritual realm to subsist on, which is something I don't think we knew before. So the 2 dragons we need to talk about are firstly Frost. Now Frost we have seen in the epigraphs in Words of Radiance. So this is the first time we've really seen him on screen, and he is the oldest person we know in the Cosmere, I'm pretty sure. I think Hoid is a little younger. We also know that he has adopted a policy of non-intervention, which is why him and Hoid clash a lot, even though Hoid is also very old, because Hoid intervenes a lot, and that's probably why he didn't want Starling to get involved with Hoid, because Frost is a non-interventionalist. We also learned that Frost is missing and has been missing for a while, which I don't think we actually previously knew. And then we also see Xysis in this novel, which is a dragon we have previously met in Tress of the Emerald Sea. The last time we saw him, he was making deals there, so I think his character is very consistent in this one. So our next subcategory of people is the crew members. So let's talk about Starling's crew members. First, we have Captain Crow, who we also met in Tress of the Emerald Sea, and we last saw her with Xysis in that novel, so no surprise they're still working together. Leonore is Malwish, which we already talked about before in Scadrial, so those are the people from Mistborn. Naz is a character who has been previously traveling with Chris. Now, as a quick mention, Chris is a world hopper from Taldain or White Sand, and she is also the author of all the in-world arcanum. So anytime you read something from the back of the book that explains like the magic systems or anything like that, that is written in-world by Chris, and Naz has been her assistant. Our knowledge from Naz previously has mostly come from little notes he makes to Chris throughout kind of all the special pages or any of her notes. And also he makes a brief appearance in Mistborn Era 2. We have known that Naz is from Threnody. So Threnody is the planet that is involved in the novella Shadows for Silence in the Forest of Hell. As an aside, I love that novella, so I highly recommend it. But he wasn't dead the last time we saw him, so that is new information that Naz is now a shade, and we know when everybody who dies on Threnody becomes a shade. Now, if you haven't read that novella, he is very cognizant for a shade. Like, they do not act that way in that novella. They're very violent and kind of mindless. So this is interesting for the implications there. Like, lots of implications. One, when and where did he die? Maybe on Scadrial based on his outfit shortly after we see him in Mistborn Era 2. Why is he a shade if he didn't die on Threnody? Like, is it just something because he was born there that he's like that? And why is he still so present? Many questions. Ed was born in Silverlight, which we just talked about, but then it specifically says he is of Vaxillian heritage. Now, we have heard the term Vax and Vaxillian before, but we still know nothing about it. We don't know if that's the name of a people or a planet, so TBD. Chrysalis is a sleepless or a horde, and we don't know a ton about the sleepless, but anything we mostly know about them is from the Stormlight Archive, particularly in the novella Dawnshard. We get to see them a lot. And one also appears in Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. I do feel like this book just gave us a little bit more insight on how they're not a hive mind works, and gave us more insight into the abilities they can breed into their individual hordelings. Like, I can't remember if we've seen them mimicking voices before. I feel like we have. I feel like that happened in Dawnshard and I'm just not remembering. But just like specifically how they breed to have these special skills. I think we got a little bit more up close and personal with it since we were actually following a specific character. We also learned that several Sleepless are on First of the Sun and that they've been running this grand apparatus. I think Sanderson said in Q&A, I can almost bet my life on it, that anytime you see like a random called out Kremling in the Stormlight Archive, it's really like a sleepless hordeling. I'll see if I can find that word of Brandon, but that's something fun for you to look on a reread. And then let's do a quick round of people at the end here that were mentioned. Huio. Huio is mentioned as being like an arcanist in Silverlight, and he is a member of Bridge 4 in the Stormlight Archive. A Peak Spren is mentioned. So we haven't really seen a lot of Peak Sprens, but that's the kind of Spren that Stone Wards bond in the Stormlight Archive. The Night Brigade. So the Night Brigade is a group that originates from Threnody, and we mostly know about them from their appearance in the Sunlit Man when they are chasing the Dawn Shard. Otherwise, I don't think we know a ton about their motivations at this time. And then Chris, who I just talked about under Naz, but I did want to say we learned 2 new things about her, which is that she has an obsession with shardless perpendicularities and that she's currently had to return to Taldain for stuff that is happening there, which I think is just like a little hint that some stuff is going on with the white sand stuff. So yeah. And then finally, I wanted to mention the Iraeli. The Iraeli are a group of people that we mostly hear mentioned of in the Stormlight Archive, and the Iraeli weren't native to Roshar, but have been spending time on it, and particularly in Book 5, we kind of see as they continue their journey. Their journey is to go and pack up from one place to another to find their place, so you'll see them mentioned going forward. Okay, let's talk about shards. So let's start with autonomy, because I did talk about how Patchy is an avatar of autonomy. We've mostly seen autonomy working in Mistborn Era 2, and we know she has several avatars throughout the Cosmere. And I like what it says about autonomy in The Lost Metal. The quote, "Autonomy is driven to divide off from the rest of us, go her own way. She pushes her followers to prove themselves, and she rewards those who are bold, who survive against the odds. She respects big plans and big accomplishments." So I think that definitely tracks with what we know of Patchy as an avatar of autonomy, and makes sense that that's who that is. Ambition is also mentioned. We have the quote, "One named Odium attacked and killed his sibling. A god was destroyed, torn apart, made into some kind of terrible energy." So Ambition is the shard that was originally, or at one point, went to Threnody, and when she was destroyed by Odium very early on, close to the Shattering, that's what caused all of the problems on Threnody, made it a very unpleasant place to be. She's the reason for negative investiture identities that are in the Emberdark. I think it's also interesting they have the quote, "A full Threnodite entity, a type 1/6. So clearly they've typed all of these now. That's something we haven't seen previously. So maybe we'll get that in the Arcanums in the future. Let's talk about Yolen's Dawn Shard. So first, as a refresher, the Dawn Shards are the 4 commands that were used, that Adonalsium used to create the Cosmere. And we know of 2 Dawn Shards so far, the one that Risen has from the Stormlight Archive, and the one that we know Hoid has, and now someone else has if you read The Sunlit Man. Try not to spoil all the books when I talk about these things. And I think finding out about Yolen's Dawn Shard, that they've moved it, is a new Dawn Shard. I think this is a new one for us. Now, timeline-wise, it might be possible that Hoid had the Dawn Shard, then gave it to the dragons for safekeeping, and then took it back. I'm not saying that's not possible. My guess is that this is a new Dawn Shard. I want to talk a little bit about a harmony/discord mention. So we have this quote, "Don't you literally worship a Scadrial?" Naz asked. "That's different," Ed said. "He is nice. Plus, he's the only known living shard who has performed the..." This is incredibly suspicious to me, because when we end Mistborn Era 2, there are significant hints that harmony is turning into discord. Discord sounds like a bad thing to me, so I kind of assumed discord wouldn't be our kind of nice harmony that we've been dealing with before. And we know this part is really late stage Cosmere. So here's some things. Perhaps harmony turning into discord won't change the vessel of harmony very much. See how I'm circumventing that? The vessel very much, and he will still remain, and they will still remain a nice person. Or this is hinting to the fact that discord is short-lived. It's kind of like a spoiler that harmony won't stay as discord. Or does someone new pick up the shard? We're far away. I don't know. You guys tell me what you think about that. I'm curious, like I want to theorize about that quote. And finally, there's a mention of invention when Starling thinks in her head, "Oh, you think you're the most technologically advanced? Ask any planet's invention has invested." Interesting, but we currently know 0 planets invention has invested. We've heard about her a decent amount, or heard her in passing, I should say, but we don't know any of the planets she's invested. And now our final category, which is investiture. So basically how the magic is working, and in this book, how magic and technology combine to work. So the first thing is Allomancy. I want to start there because in all of the books going forward, you're just going to see a lot of mention to metals. And anytime you need to know what a metal does or what it is, it's like, it goes back to Allomancy, which is the magic system used in Mistborn. So when we have things like a steel launching pad, we know that steel in Mistborn is used as a push, so it makes sense that there would be a steel launching pad. We also hear a lot about aluminum throughout the Cosmere, and it's always used in a similar capacity to how it's used in Mistborn, which is to negate all allomantic powers. It sucks it out. And we see that in Trust of the Emerald Sea with the way they hold spores. So for new world hoppers, for new people to the Cosmere, a basic understanding of what the metals do, like you'll see them crop up all the time. We get some mention of an Aetherbound. Now, most of our knowledge of Aethers come from Trust of the Emerald Sea and Lumar, which, like I said previously, isn't where they originated. I think the only Aetherbound we've actually ever seen, an original Aetherbound, I should say. Crow is an Aetherbound, but it's a very parasitic Aetherbound, whereas in Mistborn Era 2, we see a Rosite Aetherbound that works more how I expect Aditil should be working. Now, it said that her dead spores were sky blue. The only blue spores we have met are the Zephyr spores in Trust of the Emerald Sea, so I'm gonna assume that Aditil's Aether used to be Zephyr. Space travel. So space travel has been an interest of the fandom for a while, and we get some specific details here. So it says we're using Rosharian anti-grav tech. My guess is these are Fabrials. Dhatarian Aethers. So a Zephyr Aether, that's the one I talked to about just previously. Zephyr, the fandom had guessed was going to be used in propulsion. We have a Scadrian composite metal hull, and possibly you could have an awakened metal mind, but Starling doesn't trust them anyway. Okay, an awakened metal mind, that is an interesting combo. And then we have other tech like allomantic bullet shields. I think that makes sense. You could push things away. Awakened deflection shields, probably the same thing, and aeonic force fields. So I think that's cool that it's described. Most of this is how the fandom has been theorizing for a while the space travel would work, so I don't think any of it's a huge surprise, but it's fun to see in action. Next, we talk about Unkeyed Light / Unkeyed Investiture in this book. So for those who don't know, Unkeyed means that a piece of investiture isn't connected to any identity with a big I. Capital I should say. So how we've seen this work before is in metal mines in Mistborn, right? If they had an identity attached to it, it means other people couldn't use that metal mine. So something that is unkeyed means anybody with access to those powers can use them. So unkeyed investiture has been a thing of interest for a while, and it seems that in late stage Cosmere, it is just pretty readily available. And then let's talk about that one Knight's Radiant. I didn't know whether to put this into people or investiture, but I'm putting it into investiture. First of all, I had a little laugh to myself when the narrative is like, the Knight's Radiant came down. Sorry, this is the part in the book where Dusk meets the other ones from above that aren't Scadrians, and it's clearly a Knight Radiant. And it says he has a symbol on his chest that it looks like a bird in flight. And I would just like to posit that low-key all of the Knight's Radiant symbols look like birds in flight. Like, I could make an argument for all of them. That said, I think this is a Skybreaker. That's my guess. The real question I have here, and this is why I put it in investiture, is what light is our Skybreaker using? Are they using Warlight? What's going on Roshar at this point? You tell me down below. Oh, and also they have a shard gun, which fandom has been really excited about. I don't really care about shard guns because guns just couldn't interest me less, but it's a shard gun. Everyone's very excited. We had theorized there was going to be a shard gun back when I did my panel in 2023 at Dragonsteel when we were doing predictions for Stormlight Archive 5. We had a whole thing about Jasna and shard guns. If I can find the slide, I'll put it up. But here it is. Here it is. Not in Wind and Truth, but it's here now. Okay, and then let's do an investiture speed round to finish things up. First, we have Luminist, which is a new type of investiture for us. It is the worms, the glowing worms. So a new one to add to our lexicon. We also talk about the AVR being a Nahil bond. I didn't know that, so if that's some information we had before, but that's news to me. As a reminder, a Nahil bond is the type of bond that is between a Spren and a Knight Radiant. So it's like a symbiotic bond, which I think is really interesting. And then finally, there's this single mention of an expensive invested communication device, which I just assume is a Scion. I don't know if Starling maybe would know what a Scion is though, so maybe she wouldn't refer to it that way, and in that case, it's something else. You tell me what you think it is. I just assumed it was a Scion. Okay, this was a long Cosmere Connections because everything is Cosmere now. I do want to make a quick statement here about this. I have so much fun talking about all the Cosmere Connections, but this is the clearest book to me so far that you really just, no one really needs this help anymore. I think this is fun as a way to do fandom and for people who are really into it and want to learn how to catch all these things to watch these videos. But everything you needed was explained in novel. Investiture was being explained, Yolen was being explained. It's all being explained in the text, and I'm so glad for that. It makes me happy because I can point to people and say, all of you people who are so worried that soon you won't be able to read a Sanderson book without having read anything else, it's like, this is a standalone. You could he even made it very purposely. He put Six of the Dusk in here to make sure that you would not have to read a different novella. Someone could just read this. It would just be like any old sci-fi where they mention planets, you just don't know what the planets are, it doesn't matter. You would just assume, oh, there might be another book, right? It would feel like, oh, there's something bigger going on that I want in the future. But he's really explaining everything, which is great. A lot of stuff that fandom has known through words of Brandon or piecing things together are just being stated directly on screen, which ultimately I think is great for the fandom. Now, I want to end this video with a quick just review of Isles of the Emberdark. What did I think of it? So I ended up giving Isles of the Emberdark 4 stars. I loved Dusk's story so much. I hadn't read Six of the Dusk in like 10 years. It's been forever since I read it. And so I just read this straight through because I needed the reminder of what happened. I only remembered like the high level thing. And when I originally read Six of the Dusk, I liked it. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't like evangelical, like, wow, it's such a good novella. I fell in love with Dusk in this novel. I just absolutely loved him as a character. I loved his resolution. I loved what he had to go through. The Dusk stuff in this novel was 5 out of 5 for me. I loved it. What brought the book down a little bit for me and why I ended up giving it a 4 is actually the Starling stuff, which I know sounds crazy. I love the idea of Starling as a character. The Endless Optimist, I think, is a very fun character, that kind of golden retriever. I like a lot of those characters. For me, I feel like she just wasn't fully formed. I think the way she was presented, and especially, okay, let me go back. It felt very predictable and it felt like something Sanderson had written before because I read Skyward, which is a non-Cosmere YA series of Sanderson's. But I read Skyward, and in Skyward there's a lot of Commander gets a crew together and they all bond. And I actually said he relied on that a little too much in Skyward. It was one of my criticisms, particularly of book 3. And so to go and read this, which is like essentially another story of a commander, like let's bring all of our crew together. It ended up just feeling like there was only one way for that story to go. I knew they were all going to band together, and I just felt like I had read it before. So it wasn't bad. It was just predictable in a way that I didn't enjoy or connect with quite as much. Now, in a different context, I think Starling could be really great. I think what I would have rathered in this book, if that there was no question about Starling and her crew, and they were already a combined unit, and Starling's journey is more internal, I think that would have been more interesting. I think that's probably the future for Starling, so I'm excited to see her in other situations. Just in this one, I didn't think it was as interesting. I'm also very wary going forward. If you saw my Wind and Truth review, you'll know my biggest problem was around the writing. And I talked about that also in other like lives. I loved where that ended up, but I did find the writing the weakest in Wind and Truth of most Sandersons I've read. And it was particularly because a lot of things were over-explained. And I didn't take off a lot in Wind and Truth because I trust Sanderson. I'm hoping it's not a problem going forward. So I was very wary going into Isles of the Emberdark and looking for that. I think some of it creeps into Starling. Some of that over-explanation creeps into Starling's storyline, which is why, again, I feel like I didn't enjoy it as much. Whereas I really didn't find that in Dusk's, which was so relieving to me, because what's so interesting about this novel is it has writing from him that's like 15 years old. And when I was first reading those flashbacks, I noticed a difference. I noticed like maybe a higher quality of writing. I'm just gonna say it. And I felt like he was able to keep that quality with the other Dusk stuff. but I noticed some of the drop in Starling of that over explanation. I guess a drop in quality isn't it's a different kind of quality, but just that over explanation. But I am relieved that it's much, much less in this novel, and I hope to see that it is only something that plagued Wind and Truth. I'm guessing some of you wanted to know that, so I wanted to be upfront about that. I do not think in general it plagues Isles of the Emberdark, especially not Dusk's story. Well, I explained that, over-explaining. Let's also talk about the art real quick in this. First of all, I love the cover. I think it is gorgeous. I think it's just as great as all the secret projects have just been so beautiful. I also love how, if you don't have the physical version, it's regular white pages until they enter the Emberdark, and then it's all black pages, which I think is such a cool little detail. The silver and how it looks on the page is a really awesome look. And there's a couple of pictures in the novel that they do silver on black that are just so incredible. As a whole, though, it's not my favorite art. It has really nice colors. I'll do some up close, but this is what I complain about with the handbook secret project, is some of the people just look a little Gumby for me. People are hard and these people look a little Gumby. So the full color illustrations aren't my favorite. Definitely Yumi and Tress still have it on that. But I also love the end pages. The end pages are gorgeous. So overall, very pleased with how the book looks. Okay, we have been here long enough. If you made it this far, I am grateful for you. Please tell me the revelation you were the most excited about in Isles of the Emberdark. Tell me what you thought of the book, give it a review. And as always, if you like this kind of content, please like and subscribe. That's the best way to support me. And if you want more Brandon Sanderson content, you can check out my Brandon Sanderson playlist. And if you want to see what I'm currently reading, as well as other nerdy rants, you can check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. I'll see you next time. Bye.